Hello, I'm Leroy Garcia, and this is Blue Rain Gallery Podcast. Today we're going to do a walk along with one of our favorite artists, Doug West. Welcome, Doug, in front of your amazing poster. It's nice to have you back in Santa Fe.
Nice to be back, Leroy. This is absolutely my favorite time of year because of all the yellow colors, and it's not too hot. The town's quieter.
Yeah, it's a nice time of year.
And it's really the best time to visit Santa Fe.
Yeah, I wanted to remind everybody, we just released a initial podcast of Doug's a few weeks ago. I'd like to encourage everybody to go visit that on our website, blueraingallery.com, under the menu podcast. Anyways, let's go ahead and walk in and talk about your show.
Let's do that.
So here we are in the gallery, visiting some of Doug's paintings that he's been working on for the last 6 months, 7 months?
6 months.
Yeah. And they're all very beautiful. I see a lot of floral things going on here and vibrancy along with the landscape. So what do you like about this show so far that you've done?
Well, I certainly like seeing it all together, and particularly in the gallery space, because my studio where I work down in southern Baja of Mexico is relatively small, so it's really fun to see these in a bigger space. I use florals as a symbol of nature, and then also to create spatial depth. And a number of these paintings, including this one titled My Greatest Hope, kind of has to do with light, awakening in the landscape. A number of these are inspired by southern New Mexico. And I'll speak more about that when we go around.
Well, this is a reference to the last podcast where we talked a little bit about Doug's journey as a recovering fire victim. I don't know how you call it.
Yeah, I was in a propane explosion, which, is instant heat and then it's over with, but profound effect that put me in a hospital in San Antonio, Texas for 10 weeks. And it wasn't a struggle necessarily for me in terms of thinking I was on the edge of going to the great beyond, but I certainly was assessed at that as a likely outcome. And all of this work kind of speaks to my joy of having survived that.
Well, I was wondering how that affected you. Did you have to relearn some things with muscle and hands?
It's one reason, and we get to the last painting. That was the first painting I made in my studio after returning home. Within 2 weeks of returning home, when I was still sort of shaky, and it was to test if I could still do what I need to do. I have some issues with nerve sensitivity because a lot of my skin has been grafted, and my hands are, I have to be patient because I'm dropping things all the time. But I'm pretty good about holding on to the brushes.
I think it's amazing. Another thing that sets Doug apart from most landscape artists is the amount of detail that he puts in his paintings. And because that he's not prolific, he doesn't overproduce in any way. A lot of his work has a pointillistic feel, especially when you're dealing with the landscape areas as well. And then, not to mention the beautiful cloud formations or how you play with light onto the scenery. So let's go.
Okay, Leroy. Okay.
So this looks like another southern New Mexico scene.
It is. Yeah, these are not all of them, but a number of these are referenced, at least for a background, to a place called Playas, New Mexico. And it's really near the border of Mexico and Arizona. A little bit southeast, but south of Lordsburg. And I just happened to get off the interstate on the way home from my last show before my accident and shot a bunch of photographs there. I was there in just a perfect day in terms of cloudy, broken light, dramatic light in the landscape. And so the feeling of space there really spoke to me. And that's kind of what I'm setting up in every one of my paintings. I really am trying to create dimensional space, and part of the way I do that is by putting something actually bigger than it should be, planting in the landscape, but having it set the stage for seeing past it to what is beyond. And this section in here is kind of what Leroy was talking about with pointillism, little dots of color that create the perception of light and distance.
Yeah, and
atmosphere.
if you notice sometimes on his landscapes, he'll have a color that just gradually fades down into the foreground.
Well, and Leroy, and these all have a graphic nature. I mean, some of the cloud work is not expressionistic, but you see the brushwork. But overall, it has many of these have a graphic feeling, and that speaks to where I came from before moving into oil painting. I was a serigraph artist.
Yeah. And you can, on our first podcast, we talked a lot about the serigraphs. Some of those screens are 110 screens.
Very detailed. Very detailed.
And he's applied that same principle to oil painting because think about the same amount of time just to
It's true.
Out, right?
It's funny because I think that initially I took a number of workshops with plein air work. And I thought, oh yeah, expressive work. Of course, that's outdoors and it's very small pieces. But I liked the idea of, I'll be like in the expressionist genre of work. And then I just ended up right back to where apparently is who I am.
You like to torture yourself.
Yeah. And this, by the way, is it's probably the second major painting I made after I made the White Rose, which we'll see last. White Rose being the one that was inspired out of my stay in the hospital.
Yeah, well, beautiful. I love this scene in particular.
Oh, yeah.
But the hollyhocks, very Mexico.
Well, this is Taos Gorge. And when I spent 13 years living in Taos, my playground was a trail that went along the west rim of the gorge, the Rio Grande Gorge. That's the Rio Grande there, because there was nobody out there. And my paintings sort of speak to being alone in nature and solitude, and this encapsulates that. And again, I'm setting up the whole thing with this foreground element of the hollyhocks, which are so typical of summer in Taos. They'll volunteer in the landscape there.
But the detail you've gotten, and again, the grass, even in the flowers, the middle part, everything is just so nicely done.
It's not over with until I'm totally satisfied. And I probably spent about 6 weeks working on this piece to get it to the very end. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's move on to this other major piece here.
Okay.
So this looks like, is it White Sands?
It is White Sands, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's a beautiful area. I like hanging out there. I've taken my kids a few times. It's kind of fun. Rolling hills.
Before I moved to Taos, which was probably in about the year 2000, I lived in Socorro, south of Albuquerque. And I used to jump in the car with my backpack and sleeping bag and tent and drive to the National Monument, White Sands National Monument near Alamogordo, and hike out into the dunes and go camping overnight. So I love that place for its serenity. This one is titled Presence because it's like the show theme is being in the moment. And again, I'm playing with composition and setting up this sort of sweep that goes to the far background over here, and everything sort of turns around this yucca. So it's like a chess game for me in designing the elements
that make it work. Shadowing from the clouds?
Well, that and the light is all coming from here. Yeah, so, yeah, and the shadowing is just by virtue of the light, because you can see it's darker over here. The light's all coming from this as the source.
Yeah.
Shadows here. So it's part of the chess game of putting these together for me, working slowly in the studio. And in some cases, I'll talk about it. I can't now because we fasted. The initial cactus, things can change a lot while I'm working. I'll decide, that's not working. I'm going to do this instead. And so I'm making decisions as the piece evolves. And generally, when I start, things are very rough and crude. I try to cover the whole canvas in a day or two with approximate colors, so I get a feel for the lighting, and then the real work and the problem solving, the chess game starts.
Well, again, you have a lot of detail, and I love the way you did the wind formations in the sand.
That just took me forever. I mean, I started out with these really dark, wide shadows here, and I thought, that's not working. And then I sort of divided them in half, and all of this evolved. And you captured the roll too, not a flat plane. This part of the painting probably took me a week and a half of work.
My gosh.
To get it right.
Well, that's what makes your work so collectible.
Thanks.
The amount of effort. Well, let's move on to this chamisa. And this is a typical plant here in northern New Mexico and in the southwest deserts.
And it's also typical of this very moment in time.
Yeah, they're blooming.
Late summer, early, beginning of fall, and they're in bloom right now. And this is very localized to here in northern New Mexico, because that really is a reference to the Jemez Mountains there. Mm-hmm. And then I'm playing off of the thunder clouds, thunderheads that build up and then blow back with the wind during the summer months. So that's what's happening with that compositional element up there.
Yeah, and again, the amount of detail on the blooming of the the little ones. And you see those purple flowers everywhere.
And like Leroy, when I first laid these grasses in, they were all kind of this light color. And I stood back and I looked and I thought, oh no, it's interrupting, it's too busy. And so I put in the green below, and that helped. And then I decided, well, it'd be fun to put some, because when the Chamisa bloom, that's usually associated with it, purple asters. You see that a lot in Taos. They'll be all together, so I've added some of that here as well.
Well, the chamisas are so beautiful, but they give me allergies.
Me too.
When they bloom.
You know what? I've been just sniffling ever since I arrived here.
You can tell that's the time of year. Okay.
Welcome to northern New Mexico. We're going to get to the last painting that is a white rose. And it's very symbolic of me first coming out of the hospital. This one, the red rose, that white rose is very has more of a softer feel to it. This, to me, has a lot more vitality, and I don't want to say masculine energy, but a little bit. And that's also tied in with the red of the rose.
And where's this at? Because it's like saguaros, right?
Yeah, come in closer here for a second. Because this, again, is the pointillism effect that I think works so well, playing off of this orange on the horizon line, but these dots enable me to capture a feeling of light. And when you stand back from it, you don't see the dots, but it creates sort of an atmospheric illusion that I wouldn't get if I just did a blend of paint there.
Yeah.
And I also like this textural contrast against something that's so simple as how I've painted that mountain in without shadows.
It is so
it's
cool.
A contrast.
I still can't get over the graduation of color from that plane all the way down, how it changes, but to do that with dots.
Well, and ideally, I'm always after spatial depth, as if you're truly kind of looking at a window or a portal into space. And I think that having foreground elements like this huge rose, which is not certainly wouldn't grow in this place.
Right.
But it sets up that drama that is almost like an altered reality.
Yeah, and where is this location, or is this something that?
It's this
area?
is graphically.
Well, let's come over here.
Okay, this is but it's reference this next one over. This is titled Way Down South because this is really the feeling of Playas, New Mexico. You would drive by it and you'd see a sign on the interstate, I-8, I guess it is, or I-10, that says Playas, and you look around, there's nothing,
And Playas means beach, right?
Yeah, it does.
But where's the beach? Or is that the essence of the beach?
It's this flat, these these are really kind of higher than they appear when you're there. It's these rolling hills, like they call them in Mexico, cerrillos, small hills. Mm-hmm. And then there's this catch plain where water has catched over centuries of time. And so it's like a flat lake bed. And that's why it's called Playas, because the water gathers there. Yeah. It's a reference to the beach, and then, it's gone.
And again, the amount of detail in the little flowers in the sagebrush.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hours in this painting.
Well, I think, I'm satisfied for the moment being now, but to really, I am always feeling challenged about reaching a higher level of expertise and excellence. And the craft of doing it, to me, is important in viewing that as part of who I am, because I'm kind of detail-oriented to start with. It's my artistic voice. But what I love about doing oil painting versus what I used to do with serigraphs is that I can put in more subtle painterly elements like I've got happening in the clouds here with brushwork, and yet I can still get this graphic, the graphic line and the details. That I could do details with serigraphs, but never that.
So in your recovery, how hard was that to get back to the detail, like these little flowers that you're doing? Because those are really tiny strokes.
Yeah, my easel has a knob at the top, and then I don't know the term for this, but a stick. That hangs off the easel. And so I'm literally resting my hand on that stick, and I'm using a brush that's a 000. It's like what ladies would use for painting eyelash liner or something like that. Very fine detail.
Very fine.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Let's talk about this spectacular piece over here.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the apex of the story, I think. Something that we've been talking to Doug about since his journey from recovery as a burn victim. So give us everything you have about this one.
Well, it certainly is the reawakening of my creative talents after my accident. And I had just nothing but time lying flat on my back for certainly 8 weeks solid to think about my life, to think about what I wanted for the future. Fortunately, I had a great staff of people at the hospital that I could interact with. But when I thought about my journey forward, I thought about spirit, and I thought about my creativity and melding the two. And I wanted to interpret this event that happened not as not from the viewpoint of a victim, but as a viewpoint of a journey, a person on a journey, a path of learning from life and taking whatever comes to you and making the best out of it. So it encapsulated in that came this idea of a white rose as symbolic of purity and what I would hope for myself going forward. And then also the clouds represent fire. And this again is Playas, New Mexico, down below here as a starting off point. But this was a huge deal for me because it was really my first test of that I could still exercise my talent and express myself creatively, and that I had the motor skills and still had the vision to create. And so, yeah, I I told Leroy and the staff here at Blue Rain that my intent in making this painting was really to never hang it, never to put it up for the public. So its price is a little bit higher.
Yeah.
However, this painting informed everything that you've seen thus far. The spirit of it, there's something I think that I'm hoping what it expresses is also in the other work. And so that's why I felt it was important to include it with the show.
Thank you, Doug,
You're welcome,
for coming and
Leroy.
talking about your work and the deep meaning of this painting and about your journey. I would like to say something on the business end of you. I think what I always look for as a collector myself is things that are unique, refined, and not overproduced. And Doug's at a point where we're maybe 15, 16 paintings a year. So we have, 7 paintings in this show?
You're right, 7 new pieces. Yeah.
Which we'll probably sell through before we get to the next show. And that's okay. They're worth every penny that we put on the price tags. And they are selling. So we're happy for that. And we're very confident.
They're a labor of love,
yes,
for sure, with a lot of patience woven into it.
So we'll be hanging this show through the end of October, and obviously we have plenty of walls here in Blue Rain, so he'll always have a presence. So if you want to come and see them live, come on down. There's plenty again references of podcasts. If you want to rehear over what we've talked about, just go to blueraingallery.com. under the menu bar podcast, and you can see all the episodes. Like to also encourage everybody to go to our online store where you can find plenty of Doug's products, and that's bluerainprintshop.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Leroy.